In this video, I'll be showcasing the best Pokemon fan games and ROM hacks that have been released or updated in the month of July 2026. That's right, this isn't a list of projects I simply think you should play this month. Each and every title in this video has received some kind of update or even a full release in very recent time. Keep in mind that this is a monthly series, so I highly suggest subscribing if you never want to miss out on any new Pokemon fan projects. With how many fan projects we have playing as humans, I'm surprised there aren't very many that let you play as the Pokemon themselves. I mean, the Mystery Dungeon franchise is fairly popular, despite not having a new game in over 6 years. Luckily, the number of Pokemon player fan games is not zero, and I think the highest quality one you can get your hands on is a Farfetch'd Story 2. First things first, this is obviously a sequel to a Farfetch'd Story 1, and I had actually planned on covering it last month until it hit me that the sequel is like 7 times the length of the original. This is a story heavily inspired by Pokemon Mystery Dungeon. There are some references to mainline content, but other than that, it's a world entirely inhabited by the critters themselves. The adventure begins with you playing as a Farfetch'd, and over time you'll recruit over a dozen Pokemon to join you on your quest. The plot is mostly fun, lighthearted, and humorous. I don't consider comedy to be something I desire in a Pokemon fan game, yet it is really appreciated when done correctly. Although, like the series it's inspired by, there is of course some depth to the world. For a game about a little duck on an adventure, the world building is pretty good. Although if you haven't noticed, I've been using the word inspired quite a bit, because as much as this game feels like Mystery Dungeon at times, it does not play like it. Combat is decided using the good old-fashioned system we all know and love, with a handful of twists. This adventure is packed with dangerous opponents, many of whom won't hesitate to attack you with mid-battle stat boosts, or even a numbers advantage. Now, I did mention at the beginning that this is a sequel to a much shorter game. To get the best experience possible, I highly recommend doing one of the following. Either A, giving the 3-hour experience a playthrough yourself, or B, just watching a recap video of the original's cutscenes the creator has uploaded onto YouTube. A Farfetch'd Story 2 was very fun and also really polished visually. The thread states the game is about 20 hours long without the use of speed up, yet as someone who used it in battle or whenever I needed to backtrack, I would say that length still applied. Before I continue, I'd like to quickly talk about Legacy of Pandora, the sponsor of today's video. This isn't your light-hearted, colorful, simple monster taming adventure with a goal of becoming the very best. In a land inspired by Greek mythology, Pandora has opened the jar, releasing 8 evils into the world. As a result, humanity no longer worships its gods, who now fight amongst each other. But born through human desire and greed are cacodemons, the monsters of this wretched realm. As Para, the daughter of Pandora, you'll tame these monsters, battle against mortals and gods alike, all while trying to survive in a world consumed by evil. What I think hooked me more than the darker tone of the story, however, is the gameplay. Cacodemons work much differently than I originally expected. They don't gain EXP, nor do they level, instead evolving through corruption, where monsters can transform into something entirely different based on your actions and moral choices. Like killing the monster of an NPC could cause them to lose a certain emotion, potentially affecting the story later down the line. Every choice not only influences the protagonist's fate, but also creates a butterfly effect that shapes the fate of everyone else. No two paths are identical, no two stories repeat. And like I said before, this is also a desperate fight for survival. You might have to kill one of your own monsters just to strengthen the power of another. Legacy of Pandora is one of the more unique monster taming experiences I've witnessed. And if you feel the same way, I highly suggest following the Kickstarter and also requesting to join the active playtest on Steam, jumping into this game as soon as possible. Imagine a Pokemon fan game with a beautiful new region, a brand new story, unique gameplay elements, and online multiplayer? In 2026, such a game isn't so out of the question. The thing Pokemon Potassium absolutely nails is its presentation. The aesthetics of the 3rd generation are here, but there's so much more color and variety, uniquely mapped locations with engaging overworld mechanics, over 130 custom soundtracks. Whoever designed this region deserves the utmost praise for their efforts, as I genuinely did not not go through a single route or town with the feeling that I had previously been there. However, Potassium doesn't use Pokemon you're already familiar with. The region of Benrica is home to over 180 new species. Visually, a lot of them are quite silly, yet for the most part do not lack much charm or polish. Even the few canon Pokemon that are in the game have received new sprites to look better next to the Fakemon. And gameplay speaking, I didn't find any to be particularly useless. Boss fights are far from overwhelmingly difficult, although I can't see a world where you can mash the same super effective move over and over again either. Yet, there is a part of Potassium I feel quite mixed about. The game advertises a lack of quote-unquote modern features, which at first I was like, okay, there's not going to be an EXP all or an in-party mover learner, but I guess modern also means things that have been in Pokemon longer than they haven't. Most importantly, limited TMs, required HMs, and no physical special split. The first two I can live without fairly easily, especially considering that HMs in this game have at least been buffed. The lack of the split, however, isn't something I think makes the game automatically bad or even worse. I just think it's unnecessarily restrictive. I don't doubt the developer's abilities to balance around that, yet there were a few occasions when I completely lost interest in a Pokemon because it was a special flying type or a physical dark type. I also think it's kind of contradictory to have the fairy type despite the efforts to make the gameplay feel older, but that's just my opinion. If these are things that don't bother you in particular, this is a game you will absolutely adore. The current version has 6 badges to obtain, yet taking the size of the region and its locations into account, the overall experience is a bit longer than you might expect. Of quite similar nature to Potassium, at least in my opinion, is Plastic Pyrite, another game with a lot of new Pokemon. Now, I think it's worth disclosing that this is not the most polished experience imaginable, especially compared to the other projects in this video. Yet, I still found it to be very charming, and to my personal delight, not created with the desire to stay true to old Pokemon games. I don't need to feel overwhelmed by quote-unquote modern mechanics. I just like having the EXP all and of course the physical special split. Plastic Pyrite takes you across the quite sizable region of Captoad, inhabited only by Pokemon unique to this game. When I said a moment ago that I didn't think this game was super polished, I think the one part that doesn't apply to are the Pokemon sprites. The Fakemon are definitely designed and shaped differently from those you're used to, but I do think they look good, or at least come off the best way the creator intended for them to look. And besides, I think the Fakemon being a little goofy looking is fine when the game doesn't have any canon mons to make direct comparisons to. I didn't find anything out of place with their balance either. They all had good learn sets, evolved at decent rates, and yeah, they played fine. What I really want to talk about is how this game spices up the combat. Gym leaders are not type-based, instead focusing on specific battling styles. For example, the first gym leader plays around priority and speed control, the second around sustain and healing over time, and so on. I found this to be a nice break from monotype bosses, as I never felt like I needed to temporarily bench a member of my team just because of its typing. Lastly, the story. The only compliment I have for the plot is that I appreciate how, silly it was. Not that I don't prefer deeper narratives, I most certainly do, but I have grown quite impatient of stories that try their absolute hardest to mimic the 3rd or 4th generation, and I think the creator's lack of care to disappoint people with a mostly unserious story prevented this 8-gym adventure from turning into that. The only flaw I think this game genuinely suffers from is that the performance is a bit iffy. Like, you're not going to be hitting 10 to 20 FPS drops, but it isn't going to run any better than other old games like Insurgents or Zeta and Omicron. Other than that, it's a fun and silly Fakemon only game that you can play right up until the end of the post-game. Pokemon Odyssey is kind of like an anomaly in the Pokemon ROM hacking scene. A much more original story, lots of QOL, and hundreds of new regional forms, all packed into one experience. It feels like one of the few ROM hacks to reach RPG Maker fan game levels of quality, but I'm not here to talk about the original for the dozenth time, because only 13 months after its final release, we have our first playable preview of Pokemon Odyssey 2. The groundwork of Odyssey 2 is admittedly quite similar to the original. It's when you get into the details, though, does it really start to stand out as its own thing. For example, the world is a single continent rather than a collection of islands, yet you still travel through it in a similar manner. The story is heavy and jam-packed with characters, but I think it gets you into the gameplay much faster. The biggest improvement over the original, in my opinion, is that the world feels a lot more dynamic. I think that's the right word. Like, the Stratums were cool, though Odyssey 2 having smaller and more linear locations in between the bigger, more open zones felt really nice. The original also had a fun twist on Pokemon balance, where they kind of just rebalanced everything on top of the 100 plus new forms. This time around, the Pokemon variety consists of only regional forms, with a lot of new ones from beyond the first 3 generations. And to give the adventure a more exploration vibe, the starter selection is more of a class selection system, with minor but useful unique passives tied to each pair of Pokemon. Odyssey 2 is easily the most polished and well-presented hack released so far this year. It has really similar vibes to the original, while also improving in almost every department. Alright, so there are 2 more ROM hacks I wasn't originally planning to include in this video, but because the idea of only including one made me feel kind of bad, I thought they wouldn't hurt to mention. The first one is Crystal Kanto. If the rectangular resolution didn't make it obvious, this is not a GBC hack, rather that of Fire Red that replaces the game's overworld and most of the battle assets with those resembling the second generation. I was mostly attracted to this hack over other Kanto projects for that reason, and also that its version of the region is not left untouched. There are a good number of new locations alongside physical changes to existing ones. The hack does only go up to the 5th gym, and while there are a few bugs, I didn't encounter anything actually game-breaking. The second hack is Fire Emerald, which combines Fire Red and Emerald into one game, with a handful of quality of life upgrades. This isn't really a concept I particularly care for. I've played both games dozens of times, and I'm not really interested in having both of them packaged together. Yet, I know it's something a lot of other people would be interested in. It's also worth noting that this is not an open world experience. You play through Fire Red and then Emerald, with Hoenn's content adjusted accordingly for the expected levels of your Pokemon after Kanto's League. In my video last week, I talked about Pokemon Rejuvenation, a title that I believe is the best Pokemon fan game ever created. However, because I'm kind of an idiot, there are quite a few things I forgot to dive into, so I'll be doing that right now. And no, I won't be spoiling anything, but I also won't be repeating myself from that video either, so I highly recommend watching that video first if you haven't already, or else this segment's gonna be kind of confusing. Rejuvenation has a colossal story, one where accidentally skipping a line of dialogue can sometimes feel detrimental. Fortunately, V14 adds a text log that you can access in-game by just pressing a button. Long gone are the days of soft resetting, asking in Discord, or even just looking up a walkthrough if you by mistake skipped a line of text. Also, on the topic of quality of life, this isn't new to V14, but the game allows you to offset the percentage of encounter rates whenever you'd like. If you don't want encounters, set it to 0. If you want an encounter every step, bring it to the thousands. In that video, I also talked about New Game Plus and how it allows you to skip puzzles you've already completed on previous save files of the game. It also does something else, and I don't really want to spoil it on screen, or really at all. It's a big thing I think is much better discovered on your own. Just make sure you finish the main story of V14 before you start a second playthrough, and do not skip the prologue. In that video, I also talked about indirect buffs to older Pokemon, and a cool detail a commenter pointed out that I completely forgot about were Shadow Pokemon. Just like any other game that includes them, Shadow Pokemon come with some unique attacks when you purify them. Some of these movesets, though, are kind of insane. Like Contrary Lurantis with Headlong Rush and Ice Hammer. It's not a crazy feature, yet it gives some Pokemon that didn't luck out with receiving Mega Evolutions, Crests, or even Avian forms something cool that allows it to stand with those that did. Finally, boss battles. And I don't mean like gym leaders or antagonists. No, I mean literal multi-phase boss fights against a single Pokemon. These I feel are important to mention because a lot of the strategies that work against a team of 6 are not going to work the same against a boss with multiple health bars, because upon losing one of those health bars, it can change its typing, moveset, ability, or even clear any status effect it has. With all the fights this game has, I think it's just another cool system that spices things up even more. If you have not played Pokemon Rejuvenation, I highly recommend doing so. It is the best Pokemon experience possible, and again, if you also haven't watched my video about it, I highly recommend doing that as well if you need some extra convincing.